Here is the voice of the working class, Rick Smith.
And welcome, brothers, sisters, working class heroes. This is the Rick Smith Show. Thanks so much for being here today on the big program. Lots to get to, lots to talk about, lots going on. Got to tell you, lots and lots of stuff happening today. The unemployment numbers came out. 6.6 million more Americans have filed for unemployment. And I guess you could look at that as a positive. I guess you could maybe look at it as a positive that last week was 6.9 million. So you could, if you were to say, hey, we're going to write a very positive headline, unemployment claims fall in the second week. Over the last 3 weeks, we're close to 17 million. 17 million people who have filed unemployment claims. That's about 1 in 10 workers in the entire country. About 1 in 10 have filed for unemployment. So you're right about 17 million people without income. You're right around 17 million people who are going to lose their health insurance. And about 17 of those million people going, hey, I got to stay home. Can't go out and find another job. Where's the money? They passed the bill. And this is one of those things where, every person who filed an electronic return, this is a simple computer code. You can literally write a computer code that would put money in everybody's account like that. It seems pretty simple to me, but, well, I guess it comes down to the priorities of our Treasury Department. So there is that. Today we were expecting the Senate to vote on the, I guess they were calling it like CARES 2.0. The second part of the CARES Act. Mitch McConnell wanted a $250 billion bill. The Democrats wanted a $500 billion bill that did a whole bunch more than the little bit that McConnell wanted. So McConnell was like, well, if you're not going to give me what I want, you're not getting anything you want either. So the voice vote didn't go down today. They have recessed until Monday. And in the meantime, again, millions of people are still waiting for them to do their jobs. Now, look, McConnell just wanted the $250 billion to go into the small business side of things, because that's their shtick. Democrats wanted to help out hospitals. They wanted, because look, we need them. Just kind of throwing that out there. Also wanted some additional assistance for states and local governments to get through this, because guess what? If nobody's working, there's no tax revenue coming in. And they also wanted to increase the SNAP benefit a little bit so that people who are home can put food on the table. Seemed pretty simple to me. It did seem fairly simple. I mean, this is one of those moments where penny pinching, probably not the best idea. Now's the time to get as much cash out there, ease this so people do stay home, so that the stress of not having enough money to be able to put food on the table is taken away. That, maybe, just maybe, take this time, relax a little bit, stay out of the general population, and this thing goes a little smoother. We flatten the curve, we get into the next couple of months, and hopefully, down the road, find the vaccine and move on. But all of these people are screaming, "No, let's get back out! It's all You're going to make this worse. Going to make this worse. But it just is what it is. But good news also today. Sort of good news. I was wondering how Joe Biden was going to respond after Bernie Sanders dropped out yesterday. Well, Biden came out with an offer, kind of an olive branch, if you will, to the Sanders folks, looking at lowering the Medicare age from 65 down to 60 and doing some debt forgiveness for certain segments of the student loan debt folks. The people who've got debt from 2 or 4 year public colleges and universities, people who have debt of, I guess it's with earnings up to $125,000 at our historically black colleges and universities, even the private ones, to me sounds like a good idea. He, endorsed canceling a minimum of $10,000 per student, and it's a start. And it's like I said, it's the branch. Now, as I pointed out today, I would have liked to have seen it a little bolder, especially on the Medicare side of it. We are in a global pandemic moment where 17 million people lost their job and ultimately, I believe, are going to lose their health care. I would have liked to seen something a little bolder. I'd like to seen something a little bigger. And look, everything's a negotiation. And I'm not saying that Joe Biden is ever going to endorse or call for Medicare for all. That's, for right now, off the table. And I know my Sanders supporter friends don't want to hear that. I know the progressives on the left don't want to hear that. But that's the reality. This is a decided issue at this point. Biden's the guy. Biden's all in for the ACA. He's talked about a public option. He's talked about now expanding Medicare. I would have liked to have seen Stabenow's. I would like to have seen him go after Stabenow's plan of Medicare at 50. This way you have a little wiggle room. You have the ability to go, okay, well, if 50 isn't palatable, maybe 55. Or, you know what, if 50 or 55 not palatable, how about 60? To me, this stuff that he's proposed is what you compromise for. It's not your starting position. And this has always been my problem with Democrats, especially centrist Democrats. They always start off with what they're willing to compromise for. And it's really just terrible negotiating. And I got into a couple of different conversations with people, and people are like, well, you're a union guy and you're used to asking for, no, I'm used to saying, okay, this is what I want. And I'm willing to stand up and say, this is what I want. But this is what I'll settle for. But I'm going to fight for what I want. I want $15 an hour for every worker as a minimum wage in this country. I want health care for every person in this country. I want retirement security for every person in this country. I want a voice on the job for every person in this country. You settle for things a little bit behind that if you have to. You don't call out by going, oh, well, let's start fighting for $12 an hour. No, you fight for what you want. And I'll tell you, I think it wasn't bold enough. But we'll see. I mean, at the end of it, we'll see if this plays. I think it got some good press today. That Biden is at least trying, and it's an outreaching moment, which I think is important. And I hope Sanders voters will look at it and go, okay, well, great, Joe, but we're going to keep pushing you on this. Because, look, I think if Medicare for all is off the table, I think the Stabenow plan is a good one in that it opens up Medicare for people 50 and older. And do you know what that would do for the younger generation? The younger generation would most certainly benefit from this, because a whole bunch of old people would leave the workforce. A whole bunch of geezers would be out of the workforce. A bunch of people like me would leave the workforce and do our own things, because healthcare is the one thing that is crushing people's ability to go out on their own. And we're in this weird moment right now where a lot of people are going to be starting their own small businesses because guess what? There's not much else. And healthcare is always that one thing. So if you really wanted to ignite the entrepreneurial spirit and get people, starting their own businesses and opening up jobs for younger people to take, right now is a great opportunity. And for me, I'm looking at this crisis as a real incredible opportunity. We should be demanding so much. Because look, the moneyed interests, the big business folks, the corporatists, the lobby class, they got their hand out. They're advocating for everything that they can stuff into their pockets. I would love to see, and I've said this a couple of times, I would love to see people be able to refinance their homes at whatever Boeing or whatever General Electric or whatever any big corporation gets a loan at. I'd love people to be able to refinance their homes at 1% interest. I'd love people to be able to refinance their debt at 1% interest. I'm not saying give them free money. I would love to see them be able to do their car loans at 1% interest if they've got an interest payment on it. Because at the other side of this, they're going to pay back their loans. But at the other side, they're going to have more disposable income, and that's going to help the economy. And I know a lot of people are saying, well, you know what, you're negotiating with yourself. You're right. We should be calling for debt forgiveness. But what I'll settle for a loan program that's going to allow us to get, close to 0% interest, like the big corporations get. And the thing is, the right does this so much better than the left does. I saw a Reuters story today where Larry Kudlow, the White House economic advisor, he came out with a plan that I've heard floated a number of times over the last couple of years. This idea that if we're going to bring corporate America back, if corporate America is going to bring the jobs back, we got to pay for it. Now, if we want our manufacturing, you've got to pay for it. What kicks me in the teeth over this is we paid for them to leave. This is the part that infuriates me. They were able to write it off. We paid for it. They left. Now they want us to pay for it to come back. Because Kudlow said today on Fox Business that he said his plan would say 100% immediate expensing across the board, plant, equipment, intellectual property structures, renovation. In other words, if we had 100% immediate expensing, we would literally pay the moving costs of American companies from China back to the U.S. So like I said, we paid for them to leave. Now he's floating the idea, pick up all their costs. And just the other day, you had Trump throwing out the idea of bringing back the 3 martini lunch. So basically, everything they claim that they undid with the tax heist back a couple of years ago, all the loopholes they closed, they want to open up again to drive the money truck right through, so that they can loot, rob, pillage, and steal from us as they've been doing all along. Only this time doing it under the guise of, well, we're going to bring jobs back. And look, they'll bring manufacturing back just with computers and automation doing the jobs, of which, that's right, we will pay for. This is the part that, as I was reading his statement, I'm going, well, of course I know where this ends. Anybody with half a brain can figure this out. Okay, we're going to pay for these U.S. companies to bring all this stuff back, and we're going to pay for the automation that is going to run these factories. Where do we, the working people, benefit in any of this? In any of these bailouts, where do we benefit? And this is where I'm saying right now, before we give a dime to these people, we ensure that we are taken care of first, that our demands, our wants, our needs are front and foremost. You want to save corporate America? You save the working class first. You want to save the big banks? You save the working class first. You keep people in their homes. You give them the ability to pay their mortgages, or you pay them off. But you don't. We learned this lesson in 2009 and 10. You do not allow them to be thrown out of their homes. You do not allow them to have to go bankrupt. And this is one of these moments where we had better figure this out, and we better figure it out quick. Because like I said, the moneyed interests, they've got their lobbyists. They've got their high-powered firms on K Street finagling and scheming and plotting and figuring out how they're going to line their pockets at the expense of you and me. That's the reality. So it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Is Medicare at 60, is that a good outreach? You think that could have been better? I'd love to hear your thoughts. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Got to take a quick break. Today is Sarah Day. We've got our favorite 3 Sarahs all lined up as guests today, and I look forward to that. Our next guest, Sarah Kendzior, is going to be here, talk about her new book that has come out, Hiding in Plain Sight, and it's available and flying off the shelves. Quick break, right back with Sarah. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show.
There's nothing more American than
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1865. That was the day Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox, Virginia. Grant's Union Army successfully cut off Confederate forces at the village of Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. Historians agree the terms were generous to the Confederacy. The surrender marked the beginning of the end of the Civil War, with 3 more key surrenders before the end of May. Half the country was in ruins, with as many as 750,000 dead. In the North alone, millions more lay seriously injured. At least 40,000 formerly enslaved blacks died fighting for their freedom. It was considered the country's turning point. The Civil War ended the slave system, forged a centralized federal government, and created a national structure for the institutional development of public health, veteran care, and aid programs. The era of Reconstruction ushered in a period of hope and opportunity for black freedom, equality, and prosperity. But historian Gregory Downs argues in his book After Appomattox, Military Occupation and the Ends of the War, that the war did not really end in 1865. The South was essentially under military occupation until at least 1871. Downs writes, quote, "By severing the war's conflict from the Reconstruction that followed, it drained meaning from the Civil War and turned it into a family feud, a fight that ended with regional reconciliation. Once white Southern Democrats overthrew Reconstruction, they utilized the Appomattox myth to erase the connection between the popular, neatly concluded Civil War and the continuing battles of Reconstruction." For Eric Foner, the period was one of revolution and counter-revolution, a massive experiment in interracial democracy without precedent. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So the Wall Street Journal, yes, the newspaper of the investor class, their editorial board put out a piece today saying that basically what I've been saying for a while: stop watching the press briefings. They're a waste of time. Only they did it in a much nicer way than I did. They called them boring and not productive, which sent Trump into an absolute tizzy. He tweeted out this afternoon that the Wall Street Journal always forgets to mention that the ratings for the White House press briefings are through the roof. Monday Night Football Bachelor finale, according to the failing New York Times. He chooses to cite them there. He goes on to say, and is only way for me to escape the fake news and get my views across. A Wall Street Journal is fake news. Yeah, now they had the audacity to write in their editorial, and look, I 100% agree that Mr. Trump seems to have concluded that the briefings could be a showcase for him. Perhaps they substitute in his mind for the campaign rallies he can no longer hold because of the risks. Perhaps he resented the media adulation that New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has been receiving for his daily show. Whatever the reason, the briefings are now all about the president. And you go, now? They've only been about him. I mean, that's the bizarre part of this. Now the Wall Street Journal has finally come around and figured it out. And I guess, this is one of those things where once you figure out you have a problem, maybe then you can begin to solve it. It's kind of like being a drunk. You realize, hey, I'm a drunk. Go get help. Maybe there's hope. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on where we are and where we're going, I've asked our good friend Sarah Kendzior to come talk with us. Sarah's a writer, scholar, a co-host of the fantastic podcast Gaslit Nation. Also has a fantastic new book out, Hiding in Plain Sight, which is available and, as I understand, flying off the shelves. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
No, thanks for having me.
So congrats on the new book. I hear nothing but fantastic things.
Oh, good. I'm glad to hear it. Thank you.
So I'm looking at this, and I'm looking at the Wall Street Journal, the newspaper of the investor class, telling me that the Trump hearings or briefings were boring and, well, not productive.
I'm sorry, you cut out for a second there. What?
And not productive.
That what are the briefings?
Yeah, the whole show.
Oh yeah, I mean they're obviously not. And it's good that finally the Wall Street Journal would admit that. Everybody should admit that because it absolutely is a replacement for the rallies that he can no longer have because of coronavirus. It's the Trump propaganda hour. He literally has a captive audience now. We are trapped inside our homes. We have the choice to turn this off. That's the choice I made. But this is like his ideal situation. He's the reality TV president with the captive audience who is pitting states against each other, forcing them to fight over medical equipment in a literal life or death situation. And that's, all this means to him, beyond just also a way to extort people, make more money, consolidate his autocracy. But in terms of, empathy, in terms of actually helping people, this administration has, no desire to do that. And it is a performance for him. It's, a spectacle state, and it's grotesque, and people should turn it off, and networks should stop airing it.
Here's the thing that gets me, and we've been talking about this for years now, that it is all about him, but it is about the kleptocracy. The fact that they have really come out and said, look, it's not the federal government's job, it's the state's job to go out and beat each other up to get the things that they need. And I don't think that's gotten enough attention, that their view is, well, screw the states, it's on them.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely hasn't got enough attention just for it being a, dangerous, life-threatening way to treat a pandemic. I mean, it's grotesque. They're putting millions and millions of people at risk. But I also think, there are a number of agendas going on. One is short-term profit, where they're basically stealing this equipment and selling it to higher bidders and putting it into the private market so that they can make money for themselves. That's the short-term goal. The longer-term goal is the destruction of the United States, both in just sort of a classic disaster capitalist way, as Naomi Klein and others have described, but also this fulfills, the fantasies of Putin and his ideological backers and others who want to break up the United States in a manner that's similar to what happened. And obviously, the histories of the USA and the USSR are very separate in terms of how they came together in the first place, but they would love it if there are secessionist movements, if states like California get so fed up with the federal government that they decide to become their own independent body. And, it makes me slightly nervous when I see Newsom referring to California as a nation state. They love this red-blue dynamic. They love this kind of narrative that, the blue states are being maliciously attacked, which they are. I mean, they absolutely are. And the red states are getting everything they want. That's a load of crap. I mean, I live in a red state. My county alone asked for 2,500 coronavirus tests. They got 25, and that's very typical of how supplies and medical equipment have been doled out. You see Louisiana suffering. You see Michigan suffering. Like, everyone is suffering except for Trump and his little pack of cronies who seem very sanguine about their own health situations despite being in their 70s. Like, this is a geriatric crime cult that seems to act as if it's immune from this virus. So, yeah, I just hope people don't fall for this, because we need to pull together as a nation, and we can't let these sort of, this combination of a game show and a dictatorship in the Trump administration tear the United States apart.
It's interesting that you point out the differences between the red and the blue states, because, I was just having this conversation just earlier today where I was saying, well, I don't see anybody that's getting what they need to fight this. The red states are doing all the crazy stuff of going, no, it doesn't exist, don't worry about it, go out, do whatever you got to do. And, the blue states are trying to clamp down while nobody's getting the things that they need. Without special access. And I look at the story in Houston, where the doctor who's a member of the RNC called the lieutenant governor to get the malaria drug, and he got it right away. And yet I know people who need it for actual ailments who can't get a hold of it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, in every state, ordinary people are getting screwed, and poor people are getting screwed worse. They didn't have good access to medical care to begin with, and that continues now. And meanwhile, like, every celebrity seems to be able to get this test. Every elected official seems to be able to get this test. And so there's this hierarchy about just being able to possess basic knowledge about our health during a pandemic. And so, yeah, it's gross, and I feel like they're going to take it to extremes. Like, if a vaccine actually emerges or some sort of, medically verified treatment actually emerges, I can't fathom this administration actually just making it available to everyone. I think they're either going to mark up the cost to some sort of exorbitant amount, or they're just going to inoculate like the absolute wealthiest people, the millionaires and billionaires. They'll be able to move and travel freely, and the rest of us will be treated as like diseased lepers. It's a serious danger. I don't think people are thinking far enough ahead about how the coronavirus is going to be exploited for full fascism. Like, there have been some obvious moves, like Bill Barr saying he wants to, put people in indefinite detention. But, I think they're going to try to catalog entire groups of people as diseased, including migrants, including, some immigrant groups, ethnic groups they don't like, and quite possibly the political opposition. And they may use that as an excuse to prevent people from travel, both domestically and internationally. They suddenly stopped issuing passports. There's absolutely no reason for them to be doing that. Like, they say it's to discourage international travel, but if borders are already sealed, that's what will discourage it. The fact that there's a pandemic will discourage it, and airlines can just say, no, you can't fly. A passport is a piece of identification. It can help you vote. It shows your citizenship. That is what they are chipping away at, I think, is the idea of guaranteed citizenship. And they've been doing that steadily from the beginning of the administration. And I'm worried that they'll take this pandemic and pull that, to a whole new and very frightening end, where we can't take, even if we were born here or, have been naturalized, we won't be able to take that for granted anymore.
Yeah, so what you're saying is we're basically living out the Hunger Games. The poor people, they're going to end up, you're on your own. You'll be stuck in District 13 or, just wiped out. And there's part of me that goes, this is how they end up, depopulating our old, our disabled, our poor, because the heck with them.
Well, I think depopulation is a goal. Like, I know I've discussed this on your show before with climate change, that's been their attitude, is that when there is a climate crisis, when there's some sort of, overwhelming calamity that's going to wipe people off of the earth, that's going to make it harder for them to survive, they're for it. They want to accelerate it. That's how they've always behaved, because a depopulated earth is easier for them to manage. And I've never believed them when they say that they deny the climate science and they don't believe in it. They totally believe in it. That's why they've been buying luxury bunkers, like, all over the world, in New Zealand, in like Montana and, the northern states of America, that will be more favorable during climate change. Like, they've been preparing for disasters this whole time. And this pandemic is unbelievably convenient for them. It's arriving at a moment that works out quite well for them. So we should all be on guard, because I am afraid of that. I'm afraid they're going to go, honestly, like full Pol Pot. Like, I'm afraid that they're going to decide, the best way to cure us of this virus is just kill the people who have it. Like, I'm very much hoping that it won't come to that it won't be something so extreme, but that's had something like that happen thought it was out there and extreme before it actually happened. So I just think, we're dealing with a bunch of sociopaths. We should be honest about that and, watch them very carefully and ward off these terrible outcomes.
Because I'm seeing reports that are saying maybe it's not going to be as bad as we expected. They've now revised the number of deaths down to 60,000, which is still a lot, but it's not the 240 that a lot of people had originally thought it could get as high as. But my problem with that is all the mixed messaging that we get out of the Trump, song and dance. That here very soon people go, oh, everything's fine, and we go back to our normal lives, and then it spikes up again, and we end up,
absolutely.
We end up worse off than when we started.
Yeah, absolutely. There's the danger of that happening. And, part of the reason for the self-imposed quarantine, for self-isolation, it wasn't only to prevent death, it was to prevent the hospitals from being overwhelmed and from people dying in the hallway or not being able to have access to a ventilator. It was to, make it possible for medical professionals to do their job, especially because the Trump administration refuses to provide equipment. And so in that sense, in many places, it is alleviating a bit of that pressure and that stress. Unfortunately, not everywhere. Like if you look at New York, they're in a terrible position. And so if we come out of it with fewer deaths, we obviously want fewer deaths, but it's not a victory. It's a tragedy no matter what happens because people died. And it's so unbelievable to me that I would have to even say that, but because of the way that Trump presents death, where it really is just like a reality show or a video game to him, and he doesn't think of humans as real. He thinks of human beings as disposable. They're just going to recite statistics because a lot of people in the media, they kind of emulate his tone on this. And if we manage to lower the amount of people who died from this or who got severely ill, then good. It's because people listened. It's because people took precautions and they listened to medical experts and, they sacrificed quite a bit and they did, what they could to save the rest of society. And then afterwards, though, we're going to be dealing with a massive amount of unemployment, a Great Depression level of unemployment, and all of these secondary side effects from this, like untreated disease, people who lost their insurance because they lost their jobs, people with psychiatric problems, with PTSD, and other things that came from this pandemic. I mean, the effect on people's mental health is immense. I really, I think people are just going through hell. They're having nightmares, all sorts of stuff is going on, and that's a normal reaction to this, but it doesn't make it any easier to get through. And so as a country, we're going to have a way to go on this. Even if by some miracle the actual disease itself goes away or we get a vaccine for it.
Yeah, but for me, what I've been saying for the last couple of weeks is what we're seeing play out in front of us is 40 years of inequality finally coming to a head, where you're starting to really see the people who can't muster this. I mean, we've seen the studies. 40% of people can't come up with $500. 60% of people can't come up with $1,000, and yet they've claimed there's this lifeline coming, and it's way too long getting here.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was one of my concerns. In February, when I saw what was happening in Iran and Italy and that it was spreading very quickly, that was one of the things that entered my mind is, one, people should be stockpiling supplies right now, which is something I had done. But then I thought, well, that's because I have $400. I didn't spend that much on stockpiling things, but, I had that. I had $400 to spare, and about half the country doesn't. And a lot of the people who don't are people who have dependents. They have children, they have elderly folks in their home, or they're on disability. They're already in a difficult situation. And no, the government is not acting quickly enough to move these checks along or to give checks to people in an amount that really makes a difference. To do this sort of everyone gets $1,200, no matter where you're living or what your situation is, it goes a lot further in some places than in others, and it goes further depending how many dependents you have. They don't care. Obviously the Trump administration doesn't care, but it's still so disgusting to watch them just bail out these corporations and to also put that money in the hands of people like Steve Mnuchin, who was one of the only people in America to make a profit off of the Bernie Madoff Ponzi schemes and who partners with oligarchs. Who is just, the last person you want in charge of $1 trillion. And he should have been removed as Secretary of the Treasury a very long time ago. And now we're all going to pay the price for the fact that he's still there making these little deals with Pelosi that make no sense to me because they don't benefit the American public and they certainly don't provide the kind of immediate relief that people need.
Let me ask you this, because I got a couple of people emailing me asking about Trump and his fascination with this malaria drug. Do we know if he's got any interest in that drug? If the family, the kids, any of them? Because we've heard a lot of shenanigans of Republicans selling things off or buying different stocks of what we know is going to do well. Do we have any hard evidence on any of this stuff yet?
I feel like this is one of these things, I've said many times that Trump covers crime with scandal, and another thing he does is he covers a giant crime with a small crime. And so what I'm guessing here is that, yes, he and Kushner and some others probably have invested, or seem to have invested, in this company producing this drug, and if this drug is released, they're going to make a profit. That kind of profit pales in comparison to the amount of money that they have been stealing from the U.S. federal government, from their deals with various mafiosos, from their connections with oligarchs, from the release of sanctions, and all these pre-existing arrangements that they've already had, from Kushner getting his massive debt paid off by, gutter. I mean, there's so much stuff going on. It's bigger than that I'm sure they're enjoying this discussion about, ooh, does Trump have a little heist going on with malaria drugs? And the thing that's really nuts is that if this is any other president, if this was, Obama or even George W. Bush, the malaria drug heist would be enough. But for Trump, it's a cover story. I mean, that's what I basically think it is. I think it's a real crime, but it's also a smaller crime on his giant scale of crimes. And that just shows how much trouble we're in, where we have people who aren't just, petty thieves, but are part of a giant transnational criminal operation that has hijacked multiple governments. And our, agencies and institutions that are supposed to bring accountability and stop people like that have failed. And now, the criminals are in charge.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to what we've been talking about from the beginning. It's all about the kleptocracy, and it's right in front of us. And it's not just them. I mean, it's going to be all of these Wall Street criminals who are scheming and plotting and figuring out ways that they're going to be able to get their snouts into that $2.2 trillion bill and line their pockets at the expense of the rest of us.
Yeah, it's disgusting. I mean, we've already seen, senators and other representatives involved in insider trading, and they're just going to keep doing it. And it's even worse now than it was in the George W. Bush era. I mean, we certainly saw a lot of that. We saw war profiteering. We saw people taking advantage of the 2008 financial collapse and making money off of that. But there is a little bit of fear that there would be some form of accountability leveled. You saw people like Bernie Madoff, for example, going to prison over this activity. I think the Bernie Madoffs of today feel no such fear because there are people exactly like them. In fact, people who worked directly with Bernie Madoff in charge of the Treasury, in charge of the government, working in the GOP. And so, yeah, a lot of people will get in on this scam, and they're not worried about the leverage of the election. They're not worried about the public being like, wow, you told me I should sacrifice my grandma to the stock market, and meanwhile you stole millions of dollars based on insider knowledge of a plague that killed people. Normally that would make you, take pause if you were the person who had done that and think, wow, my election prospects are pretty screwed for this fall. But they're not worried at all, and I think that that's a sign that they intend to either, postpone or not have the election, or, more honestly, to rig it and manipulate it through all of the methods that they employed before: voter suppression, foreign interference, insecure machines, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's a pretty ominous sign.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to believe that that's possible. I want to believe that there are good and decent Republicans out there who are going to, if some of the shenanigans were to be proposed, that they would come to the rescue. But I don't know. I don't even know that it matters what Republican voters think either.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't seen good Republicans. The ones who seem to have a conscience either quit or they left the party, like Justin Amash did. I haven't seen anyone actually in office behaving at all like a normal, ethical human being, or like a careerist who's afraid of their political future. why I fear that the leverage is gone. I think Republican voters are a different story because they're directly affected by the pandemic, and I think that they're also worried for their families, and their, lives have been disrupted, their businesses have been disrupted. I don't think that they're necessarily happy with Trump. I don't particularly trust any of the polls that go out regarding Trump. Like, I feel like everyone forgets that Michael Cohen, Trump's lackey lawyer, admitted that Trump was rigging polls in the media and that he had this whole, side operation, just like he did with puff pieces and other kind of, media materials that they would plan major publications, or things like Steve Bannon partnering with the New York Times. They've got people rigging opinion polls so that they're favorable to Trump. And then when people have the perception that he's favorable, they buy into that. And then you get all these articles that are like, wow, why are the Trump voters, they're so loyal and they love him so much. And it's really a very small, part of the population that is that loyal to him. Like, I'm not saying it's not there. There are people who really do like him, but I don't think it's 40% of the country. I don't think his approval rating is that high. It's all part of, the reality show. It's part of the illusion. And so I would encourage people to, to disregard any poll you see about favorability regarding his reaction to the coronavirus, because in honesty, everyone is freaked out. People are scared. They're looking around. They're like, what the hell is happening? Like, where's my job? Where's my school? Where's my life? Like, no normal person is just sitting around chilling thinking, oh, yeah, this is going to work out great. I mean, it's like the most obvious thing, that is going to be a disaster. You don't need to convince people.
So I guess the last line of questioning I've got for you. I've been saying, hey, we got a lot of time on our hands. We should be doing something. And I'm of the organizing mentality, because out of all of this crisis, I'm hoping that we finally wake up, that we've been getting screwed for 40 years, and we start demanding, things that are going to actually benefit us. Loan forgiveness, wage supplements, guaranteed minimum income, something. Any advice, any thoughts on what we do with all this spare time other than be in despair?
No, I think we should push for all of the things that you mentioned, and I think also there's broader public awareness that, yes, people working, in the supermarket, working at Walgreens, working at all these places should be making at the least $15 an hour, and quite honestly much more, that these are essential workers, that there's no job that is actually unskilled. I think people are having greater value for teachers now that they're home having to homeschool their own children, and they're realizing what their teachers do every day. They're seeing them on virtual learning, and so I'm hoping that greater appreciation for, jobs and people who are often maligned or sort of, treated as less than they are. Like, I hope people are valued and get more money, frankly. And I hope that, that also leads to changes in how health insurance works, in how we address poverty. There are people now who are forced to go to food banks that, they never thought they would be in this situation. And I think that that's created, more empathy for people who have almost always had to be in that situation because of intergenerational poverty. And so it's a wake-up call for a lot of people, and it's like the worst way to wake up. It's not like a good thing. It's nothing to celebrate. But if it's happening, then I agree with you. You should take that opportunity to push hard for progressive and humane policies that we've deserved for a very long time. And we have an election, so, this is the time to do it and to try to, get those ideas as mainstream parts of a democratic platform.
Absolutely. The book, real quick, Hiding in Plain Sight. Where do we get it?
You can get it, anywhere. Bookstores are often doing curbside delivery. I encourage people, or they're doing mail delivery. I encourage people to order from independent bookstores because they're really struggling to stay afloat. But there are also ebook versions. There's an Audible version. Like, you can get it pretty much anywhere books are sold. And I encourage you to do so because it tells the story of how we got in this terrible situation to begin with.
And you actually read the audiobook, right?
Yes, I did. There's a sample of it in this week's Gaslit Nation, the podcast that I host. There's like a 3-minute sample of the first chapter for those who want to check that out.
Good stuff. And there's no Sarah.com where they could go to get it directly from you?
No, not from me. It's from Flatiron Books. And actually, you can go to hidinginplainsightbook.com, and it gives you a list of all the vendors and the places it's sold.
Good stuff, Sarah. I appreciate the time. Thank you so much. Stay safe. We look forward to talking to you again.
Thank you. You too.
Good stuff. Our good friend Sarah Kendzior. Make sure you check out the book, Hiding in Plain Sight. We'll send out links on maybe places where we can pick it up. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. This is The Rick Smith Show.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
Together, we have transformed American consciousness as to what kind of nation we can become.
Climate champion Bernie Sanders exits 2020 presidential race.
Research finds that your risk of dying from COVID-19 could skyrocket if you live in an area with long-term bad air pollution levels.
New study finds yet another reason to clear the air. Great Barrier Reef suffers another extreme bleaching event. Plus, good news for breathers as polluting coal plant closes in Kentucky.
All of that good news and more straight ahead from BradBlog.com. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
Stand by for 6 minutes of independent green news, politics, analysis, and snarky comment.
I mean, damn, those are some blue skies. I bet India probably even forgot there was a time when skies weren't gray. The same way America forgot there was a time when presidents weren't orange.
I haven't forgotten. I dream about it every night. And all day. And even right now. This is your Green News Report.
They used to be brown.
Okay, Desi Doyen, so Bernie Sanders is out.
Yes. Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont ended his campaign for the 2020 Democratic presidential nomination on Wednesday, vowing to help unify the Democratic Party to help presumptive Democratic nominee, former Vice President Joe Biden, win in November against Donald Trump. Sanders had the most progressive climate change and environmental justice policy proposals of all of the Democratic candidates.
Even more than Elizabeth Warren?
Even more than Elizabeth Warren, who was also very, very good. The policies that Bernie Sanders promoted were most aligned, however, with the speed and scope of action that scientists say is necessary to avoid climate catastrophe. In a video announcement, Sanders noted that his proposals were once considered radical, but now they are mainstream, and he encouraged his supporters to keep fighting for the progressive agenda and for climate action.
If we don't believe that we are entitled to live in a world that has a clean environment and is not ravaged by climate change, we will continue to see more drought, floods, rising sea levels, and increasingly uninhabitable planet. It was not long ago that people considered these ideas radical and fringe. Today, they are mainstream ideas, and many of them are already being implemented in cities and states across the country. That is what we have accomplished together.
Well, I guess it depends on your definition and Bernie's definition of mainstream. He has moved a lot of these ideas closer into the mainstream, but I think that there are still people who are kind of freaked out about doing the right thing for the climate.
Indeed, there's a lot of work to be done on that front.
Well, now Bernie Sanders will have much more time to do it.
An important new study links air pollution to significantly higher death rates from the COVID-19 coronavirus. Preliminary results from the Harvard University study found that nationwide, even a small increase in particle pollution in previous years was associated with a 15% increase in the death rate from the virus. Polluted air is already known to increase the risk of premature death from chronic respiratory ailments, heart and lung diseases. The researchers calculate that slightly cleaner air in Manhattan, for example, in the past, could likely have saved hundreds of lives. The new data might also help explain, in part, why African Americans are dying from COVID-19 at much higher rates than other groups.
That would explain it.
Multiple studies have shown that polluting power plants and polluting industries are more likely to be located in communities of color, far more than white communities. The Harvard researchers say their preliminary results indicate that failure to enforce existing air pollution regulations could potentially make the COVID-19 pandemic even more deadly. And they cited the Trump EPA's recent decision to suspend enforcement of some pollution regulations during the pandemic.
Well, that would be a feature, not a bug, for the Trump administration.
In Australia, researchers confirmed that the Great Barrier Reef is now suffering its most widespread bleaching event ever recorded, and the breadth of the damage is more expansive than the most recent bleaching event in 2016.
What's a bleaching event?
A bleaching event is when warm water causes corals to expel the tiny animals that live in them, which give them color. That's why they bleach.
And die?
Making them more likely to die. A summer of extreme record-breaking heat that also triggered catastrophic deadly bushfires in Australia has also driven exceedingly warm ocean temperatures that have bleached the coral reef at an unprecedented scale along the reef's nearly 1,400-mile-long ecosystem. Finally, there is a bit of good news for breathers.
You promised.
Well, this is in Kentucky. The Tennessee Valley Authority's Paradise Coal Plant in Kentucky has officially closed. That despite pressure from the Trump administration and Republican Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell of Kentucky, who have attempted to prop up the uneconomical coal industry that can't compete anymore against cheaper, cleaner renewables and natural gas.
Paradise lost. For much more on all of these stories and the ones we couldn't get to today, please check out our website at greennews.bradblog.com. Don't forget you can download our reports anytime via Stitcher, TuneIn, iTunes, or Google Play. Find, follow, and share us planet-wide. Help spread the word on the Facebooks and the Twitters at Green News Report. I'm Brad Friedman.
And I'm Desi Doyen.
And this has been your Green News Report.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I was looking at a quote from Sarah's book that I find really interesting. She writes, in the eyes of the autocrats and plutocrats, the future is not a right, but a commodity. As climate change brings unparalleled crisis, the future becomes a rare asset meant to be hoarded like diamonds or gold. To millionaire elites, many of whom have already had an apocalyptic bent, a depopulated world is not a tragedy, but an opportunity, and certainly easier to manage as they insulate themselves from the ravages of a literally scorched earth. And, that just kind of sums up, what we've seen come out of this administration and the fact that they're continuing to push for more deregulation. Today, for instance, I got a series of emails from right-wing groups like the Club for Growth pitching guests to talk about why now is the time. Right now is the time we need to be doing more deregulation. We need to lift the onerous burden on corporate America so that they can revive themselves and ultimately rape and pillage. And I just keep looking at this stuff going, they never miss an opportunity. Never miss an opportunity to really stick it to the average everyday working person and to the citizens of this country. I mean, and look, as I was saying with Sarah, my fear is people like Mnuchin and their crowd. They're smart people. I'm not going to take anything from Mnuchin. He's figured out how to make himself a whole boatload of money and stay out of jail while doing things that he's done. There are really, really bright people on Wall Street. There are really bright people trying to figure out right now as we speak how they can manipulate that CARES Act to steal the whatever benefit it's going to have for average everyday working people. Literally steal food from the mouths of children to enrich themselves. And, I saw this story, I think it was Reuters that had it, talking about this Arcadia Investment Partners group, which evidently, according to them, was pitching this idea to, and I love the way they framed it, select investors, a limited number of sophisticated investors, meaning really freaking rich people. And what they were pitching is returns between 22% and 175%. And I got to tell you, I look at this and I go, I don't know, 175%, that sounds criminal to me. That sounds like I'm going to have to maybe go to jail over something like that. But not for these criminals on Wall Street, because they know that the game's rigged. They got it. They understand it. And basically what they were talking about doing is they were going to set up a new vehicle called the Paycheck Protection Program Fund, Does it sound familiar? Exactly like the legislation itself? Yeah, they were going to set up this, what appears to be kind of like a dummy corporation, where they were going to take money from the federal government and lend it out and make profit off of it. And you go, well, this is, the government program not being administered properly, or them writing it, whatever. There are just moments where I go, the intent matters, which is why I keep calling for someone like Elizabeth Warren to be put in charge of overseeing minutia and overseeing every dime that goes into the corporate world. And for someone, a Truman-esque commission to really go after, and not just fine. No more fines. I want to see, I want to see at least jail time. And since Trump and the administration are going after the death penalty, they want to undo the federal ban on the death penalty. I'm actually almost to the point to where if you're caught on Wall Street doing one of these things, and understand, I am not somebody who is pro-death penalty. I'm of the mindset that if you get caught fleecing the American people out of money during a time of crisis like this, I'm almost okay with the death penalty for those people. And understand, I'm not a death penalty person. Now, I as I've said, I've got a weird position on the death penalty. I do believe in vigilante justice. You touch my kids, I'm coming after you, but I'll stand trial. But I just don't believe in state-sponsored murder, except in this case, maybe. Because this stuff is just criminal to me. And to have these Wall Street criminals, already plotting. There hasn't been a dime out the door to working people, and they're already figuring out how they're going to fleece people out of what little they were going to get. That just sends me into an absolute rage. And they're not alone. Look, there have been a bunch of stories out there of different companies and different people leaving. There was a big Republican operative here in Pennsylvania they did a story about last week, who evidently left his consulting job so he could set up a go-between to bring personal protective gears, masks and gowns and ventilators and stuff from China to sell the hospitals here. And of course, make a tidy profit for himself. Left a lucrative consulting gig to be able to line his pockets by fleecing our tax dollars. And this, again, is where it just blows my mind that you have a president like Trump and, Kushner and the rest of the idiots around him who are saying, well, it's not the federal government's job to allocate that stuff. Nonsense. That absolutely is their job. It's their job in the times of crisis to have central control. To say, okay, New York needs it. We're going to take it from places that don't need them, and we're going to move them over there. We're going to allocate the resources that we have in the best way possible. But that's not what they believe. They believe that, everything should be like eBay. Times are tough. That mask that was, $1 before the crisis, $15. And they don't have a bit of shame in doing that because it's good capitalism. We bought it low, we're selling it high. And I think it's criminal. Also criminal. This story, and I'm sure everyone's seen this by now. Remember this is only a couple of days old. Remember the acting Secretary of the Navy, Thomas Modly, who resigned? I'm sure glad that, and now we find out, I think, why he resigned. I'm sure glad that he felt during a time of crisis, during a global pandemic, I'm sure glad that he felt it was worth $250,000 to fly to Guam to go above the USS Theodore Roosevelt so that he could rip the former commander of that ship in person. I'm sure it was worth the $250,000 while people are literally struggling to make ends meet and are stressed out beyond belief if they're going to be able to put food on the table. I'm sure glad we had that money. I'm sure glad. Maybe had he done his job, we would now not be finding out that, according to the General John Hayton, Vice Chair of the Joint Chief of Staff, that maybe it's not just one ship, maybe it's not only the USS Theodore Roosevelt, maybe it's a lot of our ships that are going to have this corona problem, and maybe we should be doing something about it. Maybe had the acting Secretary of the Navy before he was the former acting secretary. Maybe if he had done his freaking job, maybe, just maybe, we wouldn't be worrying about an entire fleet of ships having this problem. You know, this is a real struggle for me, because you've got these morons that have been in power for so long and doing nothing. I mean, basically no-show jobs. It's really just angering. And I'm hoping come November, I'm hoping people remember this stuff. The problem is it's so much. Every day it's like a fire hose. Every day there's 10 other things that would bring down another administration. But I'm hoping somebody remembers this come election time. Just my thoughts. I'd love to hear yours. You can email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.
Right-wing Republicans and corporate Democrats have become a pathetic bunch of no-can-do Nancys. Faced with an economy reeling from the plutocratic policies that these same lawmakers push down upon us, they are now whimpering that America is too weak to meet the obvious needs of its own people. We must surrender to the gods of economic despair, they cry. At a time when history calls for our leaders to step forth with a bit of FDR boldness and rally grassroots people to rebuild our economy, they trumpet for retreat, giving up on America's historic ideal of the common good. A jobs program? Everyone for themselves, they shout. Health care for all? Go to the emergency room, they scream. Social Security? Socialism, they screech. Run away from it. Public education? Can't afford it, they tell us, as they turn their backs on hundreds of thousands of teachers soon to be fired. Repair America's rotting infrastructure? Too big for us, they wail. Leave it to the next generation. Wagging tea bags rather than picking up the tools of real recovery, the woeful voices of American failure insist that they speak for the people. Hogwash. Americans are a strong, community-minded, democratic-spirited, can-do people. Indeed, the latest Gallup poll shows that 60% of the public favors, quote, additional government spending to create jobs and stimulate the economy. But we must balance the budget, whine the naysayers. Of course we should, and big majorities say we should do that by putting people to work, taxing the super-rich to pay their fair share of Social Security and other public needs, as well as by slashing the $12 billion a month we're spending for wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. This is Jim Hightower saying, it's time for these so-called leaders to stop whining and catch up to the people.
Today's commentary is underwritten by Wiley & Sons, publishers of Hightower's new book titled Swim Against the Current. Even a dead fish can go with the flow. Now available wherever books are sold.
Welcome back to the Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So I want to start this hour off with a giant FU to Bill O'Reilly. Can we start with that? Can everybody just, right now take a second and just go, F you, Bill O'Reilly? Evidently, Bill O'Reilly was on with the moron. I hate Sean Hannity. I don't know which one's worse, O'Reilly or Hannity. But he was on with a Hannity, and he was talking about the projections of, now we're 60,000, not 240,000. And he said he doesn't even think it's going to be that high. But he went on to say that many of the people who are dying, both here and around the world, were on their last legs anyway. And he says, well, I don't want to sound callous about that. And Hannity, knows that, somebody like me is going to go, boy, you're a dirtbag. And he says, you're going to get hammered for that. And O'Reilly says, well, I don't care. I mean, a simple man tells the truth. Well, here, a simple man here is going to tell you the truth. F you, Bill O'Reilly. That simple. Anyway, here to share some thoughts on, F you, Bill O'Reilly, and all the other insanity that's going on. I've asked our good friend Sarah Burris to come talk with us. Sarah's a fantastic reporter over at Raw Story. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
F you, Bill O'Reilly, and the horse you rode in on, and everybody that you know at Fox News.
Yes, I mean, really, but here's the thing. That is the right-wing thought process here. We're going to be fine. It's just going to be all those old people, all those poor people, all the dumb ones who don't take care of themselves.
Here's the thing, though. A lot of those people are Republican voters. The more educated you are, the more college that you have had, the more you tend to vote Democratic. So the people who are disproportionately going to get hurt by this are going to end up being people who are Republican voters. So that's my question. Like, have they decided that, they're just going to say F you to all of their voters? I mean, you're talking seniors, blue collar workers who disproportionately went for Trump in the last election, and people who are poorly educated. So again, I'm like, are you intentionally trying to kill your own people?
Yeah.
Because it kind of sounds like it.
It does, doesn't it? And the weird thing is and I think that it's playing fine right now because it really hasn't exploded. And if it doesn't explode the way a lot of experts have said is possible, then this will work for them. But if it does, you're right. I mean, you're going to kill off a good percentage of their voting populace.
Look what's happening in Kansas right now. Governor Laura Kelly, I think we talked about maybe last week that she wanted to do a big shutdown. So she has folded religious services into that shutdown. It's not 2 people or fewer. It's actually she's allowing 10 people or fewer. So you could still have a very small church service, or you can have small groups of church services in a very big field, whatever you want. But the Republicans in the Legislative Council, who are the people who I guess are deciding everything, since the rest of the legislature is out of session in Kansas, they decided that they were going to overrule Laura Kelly shutting things down in Kansas so that people could go to church on Sunday. And the thing is, there are they've said that there are 12 different kind of clusters, I guess, in Kansas of people who have contracted coronavirus, and at least 3 of those came from worship-related, I guess, community involvement. Some went to a conference, some went to church services, but there are at least 3 of them out of, I don't know how many that they have out of the 12 clusters that they have in the state. So again, I asked, these religious people are your voters. Why are you putting them at risk?
Yeah, but the weird thing is, because I had someone email me yesterday, and because I had talked about this as well, and I'm sure you saw the story out in Idaho with Ammon Bundy, and all the stories down in Louisiana with the crazy churches down there, and in Florida with all the crazy churches.
The guy in Tampa, yeah.
All of these religious zealots. The woman in Ohio who she's covered in the blood of Jesus, so she's aces. I had this person go, well, why don't we just let them all go to church and let them all, die off? And I'm going, yeah, okay, that's in theory an idea, but they spread it to the rest of us because they go to the same grocery store I go to.
Yeah, exactly. Like, they're the ones who, if they're going to go that route, then we really cannot leave. I cannot go and get my Thursday margarita at Guapo's, which I really look forward to, if everybody else is going to go and get coronavirus and then spread it around. Because they're being protected by the blood of Christ. Yeah. So it's these people who are, it seems like a lot of these church services, I mean, my parents are very religious, so they've been doing church online, and their whole congregation gets together on Facebook. Like, it's this big deal on Facebook. And everybody says hi to each other in the comment section. I mean, it's a really kind of a cool thing. But I look at all of these church services, and they're saying, oh, we have to have this. We have to have this. And I wonder, is this really about packing the pews because that way you're going to get money in the collection plate?
Yep. I was just going to say, it's hard to pass the collection plate through Facebook. I mean, I'm sure you could have a PayPal account or something, and I'm sure that could happen. But
online or whatever.
It's harder to shame somebody by sticking a plate right in their face.
Yeah. Yeah. And so I honestly think that a lot of these mega churches, that's what it comes down to. It's people who, you know, they want to make money off of this, and they're going to do it. But then again, I'm like, dude, if you have fewer parishioners in your church, you are going to make fewer dollars. Like, hello. This just seems like people who are, you know, digging the graves of others and throwing themselves in after the fact.
Although that's not necessarily true now that I think about it, because, you know, where my aunt lives, there's a crazy right-wing church that has basically taken over her whole community. And to be a member there, you have to sign over a portion of your retirement if you were to die. You sign over your houses. Mm-hmm. In fact, you know, when my uncle died, they actually came to her house and said that he had given it to them and that she had to move out. I mean, they really, it's not about just tithing or putting money in the plate anymore. It's about them really tying up your assets and taking your kids' inheritance for themselves. I mean, they've become real parasites in one of the worst ways.
Yeah, I've heard a couple of different churches that are like that, and it's just so fringe, you know, it's so far outside the norm, and just so sad and hopeless. Like, why would you hurt somebody like that? I just feel like, I mean, beyond the fact that it's cruel and clearly lacks empathy, it seems like a really bad PR move.
But it's what Jesus would have done.
I feel like maybe Jesus would write the article in the paper talking about how bad it was.
Yeah. Or in there, you know, kicking people, you know, tipping over tables again. You know, just kind of throwing that out there. But, you know, here's the weird thing. I mean, I haven't been paying attention to the show every day that Trump puts on. And in fact, the New York Times just had an interesting story today about, you know, some in the Republican Party are kind of wanting him to shut up, because I think people, as things get worse, are probably going to get tired of the shtick. But, you know, he's really losing his mind. Did you see the thing with Jonathan Karl the other day?
Oh, my God. And that's the thing that, I mean, Jonathan Karl, I don't know if it's just a bad week that for Karl, like he just pulled the short straw for Trump to attack him. But he was talking about it today. He said that he's been called, he called him a cutie pie. Don't be a cutie pie. He called him a wise guy. He called him a third-rate reporter.
A disgrace.
And then he wagged his finger at him and said, "You're never going to make it." It's like, dude works for ABC News. I think he's good.
Yeah.
And he's got a book on the bestseller list that he didn't have to have the Republican Party buy out for him. So I feel like he's doing fine.
Yeah, he's the head guy there. I mean, he's made it. I don't know what you were talking about. But again, this comes back to a lot of what was going on. I mean, what he chastised Karl over was ridiculous, because it was a person who worked for him, and what they came out with was common sense. We're not prepared.
Yeah. I mean, this is the thing that I feel like Trump just is not good at press conferences. He's not good at answering direct questions, and he gets so been out of shape over everything that he ends up just snapping at everyone. I remember I think it was a couple of weeks ago when someone really lobbed a softball. It was one of those questions like, what would you say?
No, people are afraid. What are you telling these people who are scared? And it was, hey, we're working on it. And he just attacked that poor guy.
And he goes, I would tell him that you're a bad reporter. And it's like, what? Like that. Here's a really easy question for you, man. Like, you really had an opportunity to feed the American people a line that would end up on everybody's local news that night.
Yep.
But it's just like, meow.
And maybe even Van Jones comes out and says, now he's presidential. Had that chance.
Right? Like, there was that option, and he just can't do it. And that was one of the things Karl was talking about, is it really seems like he is, he's really getting restless. He's having a hard time staying in the White House. We talked last week about that we saw that the Secret Service is trying to get golf carts in Virginia. And so I'm just like waiting, like when is he going to go golfing? Because he needs it. He has to get out. He can't, he needs the applause. He needs the spotlight. And, he's just not going to get it for a while, because he's going to kill people if he does it.
Yeah, somebody
and
please.
Maybe that's.
No, somebody please get him one of those virtual golf games, or a putt set to go out in the rose garden with, something, so he can go play with his balls and chase him through the woods. Something.
I think there is the Truman putting green, and then there is actually a golf game. I can't remember which president bought it. I think it may have been Trump, that he was trying to golf during the shutdown, but because he couldn't, and so I think he bought one of those for the White House. That was like his gift.
Crazy.
Because every president does something that's a gift, and so that was his.
Oh, good. How nice for him. But here's the thing. I mean, just the other day, he went on this rant about mail-in voting, and now Democrats are saying, hey, maybe come November, we should be moving towards this, because we don't want to see what happened in Wisconsin on Tuesday again. We don't want to see, millions of people have to come out, stand in line for hours at a time, and potentially infect each other just so we have the right to exercise our right to the franchise. And he threw a little temper tantrum, even though he voted by mail.
That, and what's interesting about this that I keep thinking about is a lot of the people who would not want to risk their lives to go vote would probably be elderly people. They would be older people that are Trump voters. That's a big demographic for him, the Fox News crowd. So if they aren't voting, if they're not going to go to the polls because it's not safe, that's a huge hit for him. So it really kind of behooves him to do the vote by mail thing, but there's no way he's going to do it, because more people voting means fewer Republicans, because people don't like Republicans.
But here's the thing. I mean, most of the Trump voters, the people who would come out, even the seniors, believe it's all a hoax. And we know a couple of them that are up in age a little bit, and all think it's ridiculous and where it's overblown, and we're overreacting, and it's not that big a deal. So there is that part of it, right?
I mean, I think that by the time we get to November, I think we're going to end up with our second wave of this virus. The doctors on TV are talking about it's kind of tamping down a little bit, and Trump wants to open up the whole economy again and get everybody back to work all in one big swoop. So I think doing so would really endanger everybody, and people would you'd see a huge uptick again. There's probably going to be another uptick in the fall. They've been saying this for a really long time. So if we're not going to hunker down, for the rest of the year, then I think you're going to see that more and more and more. And as this slowly spreads across the country, we're seeing it in Louisiana, in Georgia, in Michigan, all of these places, it has really stopped being a New York issue. And now that it's spreading across the rest of the country, I think it's more and more people who are thinking, I know somebody, or I've heard of somebody, or somebody, the grandmother of a friend died. And there are a lot of famous people, older, some of the greatest jazz musicians we've lost, like amazing people, all of these great legends in music, we've lost them. And so we lost John Prine. So I mean, I think that's something that people will probably pay more attention to later on in the year.
Yeah, but here's the thing, as Bill O'Reilly would say, he's on his last leg anyway.
F
Bill O'Reilly.
Less is hard. Less is hard. Mom always said, if you can't say something nice, just don't say nothing at all.
There is
I like
that.
to say, if you can't say something nice, come sit by me.
There is always that. But here's the thing, and this is where we're starting to see Trump trying to rewrite the history of this, because ultimately, when this is finally written, when we go back and we really look, this was his screw up. From top to bottom, he dropped the ball at every step of the way. All the warning signs were there. All of the bells and the whistles and all of the lights were flashing. All of it was there. He simply did not do his job. And I look at now Jim Jordan, who I got to wonder if Trump's got some tapes of him fondling somebody in a locker room. Because now you got Jim Jordan, carrying his water, going after the World Health Organization, which I guess we're going to start maybe defunding during the middle of a global pandemic. I don't know. That doesn't seem like a great idea to me.
Yeah, that seems really stupid. I don't know if it's possible for the president to make that decision. Usually the federal budget gets decided by Congress. But, and there's already a federal budget going forward. So they're going to have to do, Trump is going to have to pass another budget, which he probably won't do before the election. Anyway, I digress. The thing that's so interesting to me is that this has been kind of this weird conspiracy theory that started with the Florida guys, Rick Scott, and those guys decided that, they were going to go after China for all of this. And then I think Trump really saw it as an opportunity to pass the buck on to somebody else and be like, oh, well, I didn't screw up. I was given bad information by the World Health Organization. So that's the reason that I screwed up. It really wasn't me. It was everybody else. And China lied to us. The problem is that the way that Jim Jordan wrote this letter is it names off all of these things that China has done that screwed it up, and yet they're also all things that Trump has done to screw it up. So it's drawing this attention. He's trying to draw attention to China, but in reality, these are horrible mistakes that Trump has made. One of them was that the World Health Organization didn't name it a pandemic fast enough. Well, the WHO named it a pandemic the day before Trump did.
Yeah.
So if it was such a big problem, why didn't Trump call it a pandemic, a national health crisis before the WHO did? That's what Obama did during H1N1.
Right.
He declared it a huge thing.
No, but you're right. But but Trump said he knew it was a pandemic before the World Health Organization did.
Then why didn't he declare it one?
Exactly. So again, I mean, you can point the fingers everywhere else. Ultimately, he is the leader of this country. Ultimately, he is the decider guy, to steal a line from George Bush. He's the guy. The buck stops there, and yet all we've seen is him blame literally everybody else and come out and honestly say, "I take no responsibility."
Yeah, and he's on camera saying all of these things, telling all of these lies. It's not a big deal. It's just like the flu. Like, all of these things happened in public. They happened in front of huge crowds of people. They're on camera, and they're going to end up on, they already have ended up on ads like crazy. Everybody's doing ads about attacking Trump on this. And I heard about one $24 million ad buy that's going to go through June, attacking Trump. There's another one from Biden that's coming out. That's a $6 million ad buy attacking him on coronavirus. This is going to be a big thing for a while.
But is that going to matter? I mean, honestly and truthfully, do you think it's going to matter? Because, I'm going back and I'm rethinking 2016. And this is one of my fears. One of my fears in all this is that we're going to end up redoing all of the bad decisions that Hillary Clinton did, which is attacking him, instead of saying why Joe Biden is the guy who can lead us out of this. Because I say it all the time. The last 2 weeks before the election in 2016, all I heard from Hillary is, "I'm not him." And that didn't float. So I'm curious, do you think we're maybe making some of the mistakes of the past?
Well, so one of the things that Trump does is, because he really has no ability to, to promote himself as this great president who's done amazing things. He's lost the economy. Like, he really has nothing to run on anymore. So the only thing that he can do is attack Joe Biden and blame Joe Biden as being a terrible, horrible human being. Basically do the Hillary thing, tear him down exactly the way that Republicans have done with Hillary Clinton for the last, 30 years. My whole life. I think the problem with doing that is that, if he does it now, he's not fessing up to his coronavirus problems. Like, you can't just, run a campaign on Joe Biden sucks and not acknowledge the fact that he screwed up all this stuff. Like, you just can't do it. Nobody's going to buy that. Already Joe Biden is 11 points ahead in this latest CNN poll. I think, honest to God, it's got to be at least 11 points or higher for us to really, truly win. Because if they cheat, then we're going to need those extra votes. We're going to need that padding. So, I think, it's always like when you run a campaign, you run like you're losing. You never stop running like you're losing,
right?
Even when you're winning. And that was one of the things that Hillary Clinton's campaign obviously screwed up, and they took the foot off the gas and was just like, "Oh, we're good. We're taking off on election day."
Well, I got to tell you, I hope Biden does, because I'll tell you, I'm less than impressed with the campaign thus far. Just I'll full disclosure, I was a Sanders guy. Biden was my fifth choice, but he's the nominee. He's the guy that I want to see beat Trump. but he's got a lot of baggage. And then we're going to hear all about Anita Hill. We're going to hear all about all of his voting for the war. We're going to hear about a lot of stuff.
I think with Jen O'Malley at the helm, Jen O'Malley was a field person who, did a lot of voter connection stuff. She was with Beto's campaign. She worked with Obama. She's worked with a lot of really, really good people, and she's incredibly intelligent. And I think her taking over is going to be really helpful.
Let's hope, because we're all locked in our house right now. There's no more knocking on doors, and no more rallies. There's none of the old retail style politics stuff that Biden is famous for. So I'm going to have to really start thinking outside the box.
Yeah, one of the things that we used to do that we would play around with, I remember in the Oklahoma governor's race, is we did virtual canvassing. And I think that's what their digital operation needs to start doing. They need to have people who have a list of their Facebook friends, and they need to be able to update the voter file based on who are, making sure who people are voting for, and, stick them in to make sure that they know, all right, this person's a 5, this person, this person's obviously not going to vote for Biden, so don't even try contacting them, that kind of deal. I mean, I would love to see us have that level of, field campaign, but I don't know if people do that.
No, look, the Biden campaign has had really poor, social media, real poor digital strategy. I'm hoping that they figure it out because the one
they have
thing
a new guy. They just had a new guy who took over. I can't remember who it was, but it was somebody who was doing Beto stuff too.
Well, let's hope so, because the one thing that Trump does have is, a huge. Listen to him; he'll tell you he's number 1 on Facebook, even though it's Obama. And here's the thing: maybe with now Obama coming out of the bullpen, maybe this is really going to help Biden.
Maybe, I hope so.
We'll see.
I really hope so.
And finally. Evidently, the police at Liberty University have issued warrants for a photographer from the New York Times and a reporter from ProPublica. Why is a crazy religious university issuing arrest warrants for reporters?
I assume boredom. I'm kidding. I honestly think that they are. I think there's been so much attention to how Liberty University brought back its students thinking that everything was fine, and now they're coming down with coronavirus. And this is one of those things where Falwell Jr. Really manipulated their city officials and said, we're bringing students back to online classes. And in fact, he was bringing students back into the dorms, and that's just a breeding ground for everything, every germ and virus and God knows, just.
And back to what we said about the churches, it's all about the money.
Yeah, right. And I think that that's basically what's happened here is that once, sunlight started to shine from these reporters on what was actually going on, I know the governor was quick on the phone to him and saying, what the hell are you doing? This is not acceptable. This defies the order. And I think Falwell is trying to punish the people who wrote the story on it. Yeah. The problem is that, it's not just based on the very, very limited amount of information that I have. The warrant doesn't look legitimate to me. It wasn't filed by the clerk. It doesn't have a judge's signature. There was no affidavit that was given by anybody. And it was signed off by the university police, right? Like the campus cops.
Yeah.
So
the rent-a-cop. Yeah.
Why? And it tells the reporters that they have to report to the city clerks, to the city courthouse. But it's not even stamped by the court clerk.
Yeah, it's
they
crazy.
Couldn't even get a judge to sign it, sign off on it. And so I don't buy it.
I'm with you. I say, but I'll tell you, if one of those kids dies, I think Falwell Jr. should go to jail. We should be issuing a warrant for him. That's simple. Sarah, I appreciate the time. I appreciate the work you do. Great stuff there at Raw Story. Thanks so much.
Thanks. Have a good weekend.
You as well. Our good friend Sarah Burris. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show.
saving work in America, one show at a time. The Rick Smith Show.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1865. That was the day Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox, Virginia. Grant's Union Army successfully cut off Confederate forces at the village of Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. Historians agree the terms were generous to the Confederacy. The surrender marked the beginning of the end of the Civil War, with 3 more key surrenders before the end of May. Half the country was in ruins, with as many as 750,000 dead. In the North alone, millions more lay seriously injured. At least 40,000 formerly enslaved blacks died fighting for their freedom. It was considered the country's turning point. The Civil War ended the slave system, forged a centralized federal government, and created a national structure for the institutional development of public health, veteran care, and aid programs. The era of Reconstruction ushered in a period of hope and opportunity for black freedom, equality, and prosperity. But historian Gregory Downs argues in his book After Appomattox, Military Occupation and the Ends of the War, that the war did not really end in 1865. The South was essentially under military occupation until at least 1871. Downs writes, quote, "By severing the war's conflict from the Reconstruction that followed, it drained meaning from the Civil War and turned it into a family feud, a fight that ended with regional reconciliation. Once white Southern Democrats overthrew Reconstruction, they utilized the Appomattox myth to erase the connection between the popular, neatly concluded Civil War and the continuing battles of Reconstruction." For Eric Foner, the period was one of revolution and counter-revolution, a massive experiment in interracial democracy without precedent. Labor History in 2 brought to you by the Illinois Labor History Society and The Rick Smith Show.
Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
I gotta tell you, I'm still reeling from the unemployment numbers. I mean, 17 million people unemployed in just 3 weeks. And look, while it's bad, it could be much worse. And as bad as this administration is, as horrible as their response has been, I got to tell you, there are people out there doing a lot of really, really great work. And it's because of them that things, well, without them could be much worse, which is why I've asked my next guest to come talk with us. She's the president of the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA. Sarah Nelson represents 50,000 workers at 20 airlines, and as I said, is doing an incredible job. You look at the CARES Act, there's an example of her handiwork. Sarah, thanks for taking time for us.
Thanks, Rick.
So,
always happy to be with you, and especially the other Sarahs, too.
Yeah, I appreciate you taking time for us. Our listeners love Sarah Day. Let me start off by extending my condolences to the members that you have who have lost their lives because of this virus, just because they were doing their job, and also send my best wishes to those who are currently battling this virus because they were just doing their jobs.
Thank you, Rick. I appreciate that very much. And we've lost some really good friends and really great union activists. And there are many more flight attendants who are in the hospital right now battling for their lives.
Now, yesterday I talked about OSHA finally doing something to help protect workers. Are we doing anywhere close to enough to protect people in this time?
No. If you look back on February 2nd, Randy Weingarten and I, the president of the American Federation of Teachers, and representing hundreds of thousands of nurses across the country as well, we conducted a joint press conference that called on this administration to have a coordinated response to coronavirus. We've been doing this. AFA has been working on the front lines of communicable disease outbreak for decades now. And we actually have a checklist that we give to our airlines and to our leaders whenever there is an outbreak about the best procedures and techniques and required resources that are needed on board to be able to protect both flight attendants and passengers. And we put that out very early and interfaced with our airlines very early. We've done this in the past. We've actually been able to be a part of stopping the spread of communicable disease at the door of our airplanes in many cases because of the steps we've taken. We fought very long and hard to get OSHA protections in the aircraft cabin. We only got that just less than 10 years ago because when OSHA was formed, there was an exemption for the aircraft where the FAA retained jurisdiction. And under the Obama administration, we were actually able to bring OSHA on board. What that meant was that flight attendants got training on bloodborne pathogens and the passage of them and how to protect themselves. So that related to how to use personal protective equipment and how to best protect against the spread. And so we have that training. It's part of our annual training now because the work of our union brought that in and fought for so many years to get it and brought that into our training so that we were well positioned to be able to do the best we could possibly do to stop this spread. But as we all started to learn about the conditions of this particular virus, we didn't have the kind of coordinated response from our government that you need to see with the testing, with the clear information. One of the most important things that we hear from healthcare professionals and from anyone who is on the front lines of dealing with anything like this is that the best and most important thing you can do is get good information to the people on the front lines first, and then to the public, to our passengers. None of that happened. And of course, we had conflicting information, not enough tests, not the ability to manufacture anything in this country. Now we've got the problem with we're dying because we don't have PPE for our healthcare professionals or anyone on the front lines in our grocery stores, on our planes, in our transit systems. And so none of that was happening. And so that is a very fulsome response. And I could go on, frankly, about are we protected? Are we doing enough? And the short answer is no.
No, I mean, one of the things that's been driving me insane is, now we're saying that grocery store workers and fast food workers and airline attendants, now we're essential. Now we're essential workers. As were before, we were just, those necessary evils, those negatives on a balance sheet. Now we're essential.
Right. I mean, this virus has really proven the point and the principle of unions from day one, that an injury to one is an injury to all. And it has lifted up the dignity of work, hasn't it? Because we are actually all connected. And if one person is hurting, we're all in jeopardy. If one person is infected, we're all in jeopardy if we're not taking those precautions. Yeah. So it's really lifted up the value of that work everywhere. And we have to recognize that now. But in our world, because of the incredible inequality that has taken shape, what we want to do is recognize that and make people come to work without the proper protection. Say you're essential for the rest of us to live, and lift up the importance of that work without paying or protecting those people. And that is immoral, inexcusable, and it's got to change.
I agree. And one of the things I said yesterday on the program is I think how you deal with this is from this point forward, since we now know that employers should be doing an awful lot more, you make this a workers' comp issue. You get sick on the job, they have to pay for it. If you die on the job, it becomes part of that statistic, and you hold these employers absolutely accountable for what happens in the workplace.
Absolutely. And let's start with having Medicare for all, because if we have health care for everyone, then you don't have to be tied to your employment for getting that health care. And the employer can simply pay you for that sick leave and that time off that you need to recover, or that occupational injury that you've incurred from being at work. But you've got the baseline of that health care for everyone, whether you are at work or not.
No, I've been saying that for a long time. We should have been ending the employer-based system a long time ago. Because look, 17 million people in the last 3 weeks have lost their jobs. I would assume at the end of this month, the vast majority of them will lose their health insurance if they haven't already the day they lost their job. So this is one of those moments where this could have really helped.
Yeah, it could have helped a lot. And let me tell you about what we did in the CARES Act, because we know that today we do have employer-based health care. And so if people are losing their jobs, as you said, they're also losing their health care. So we put forward a proposal to Congress for aviation workers to say anyone who is working at an airport or for an airline should have the ability to have their companies get payroll grants, but those payroll grants are for the payroll. They have to keep people in their jobs and getting their paychecks. This is the fastest and easiest way for the federal government to get relief to working people, is to keep people in their jobs, funnel that money through the companies, through that paycheck administration. The government doesn't have to become the HR solution for the whole country, and people stay connected to their benefits. So connected to their health care, connected to their retirement benefits, connected to everything else, and in their jobs and ready to lift off again when you're on the other side of the threat of this pandemic.
Right.
So we actually got that in the CARES Act, Rick. It's 1.25% of the $2 trillion in the CARES Act was directed specifically for workers, and that is for aviation workers. Right now, Secretary Mnuchin is not implementing that, and so we are in a huge battle with him to get these payroll grants out the door. He's trying to put all kinds of financial instruments on it. He had a list of 15 questions he was asking the airlines. One was about payroll numbers. All the others were about other things that are completely unrelated to workers or payroll. 4 of the questions were about the frequent flyer program, because he has brought these people in, these financial advisors from New York, who are, by the way, bankruptcy experts. So if they don't get the payroll grants out the door, they make this process so cumbersome and so onerous that the airlines don't take the payroll grants, then it forces the airlines into bankruptcy. And I have had a front row seat to bankruptcy. I was there as a United Airlines flight attendant, and there every single day working in our union office for 38 months long. We lost our pensions. We took a cut in pay of 30 and 40%. We lost our staffing. We're working longer hours than ever before, and it gave rise to termination of pensions in this country, of turning that around in terms of that being a sacred cow that we would protect in this country for working people who had spent an entire life giving everything they have to that corporation so that one day they can retire with dignity. That got turned on its head, starting with the airlines. And I am not going back. I've seen it before. And there was a 10-year period of airline bankruptcies, 20 of them altogether, that I had a front row seat for. I know what these guys do. In the United Airlines bankruptcy alone, they charged $25 million. These are the bankruptcy attorneys for the company. $25 million for their lunches alone, okay? These guys took hundreds of millions of dollars in bonuses. They siphoned off all the money. They cut union contracts, and they did it on our backs, and they got rich. And these are the same people who are in right now advising Secretary Mnuchin and asking about their frequent flyer miles, rather than doing what they're supposed to be doing and getting those payroll grants out the door so that people can stay in their jobs. The unemployment numbers don't grow even greater, and we have a template that we can use for the rest of the country to call people back to work, actually, in other industries, and stop other layoffs from happening and keep people in their health care. That's what we're trying to put in place. That's what we're fighting so hard for. That's what we won in a bipartisan agreement in the CARES Act, and now is being held up by this administration.
No, I mean, we've seen this movie, and as you pointed out, we've seen this movie, and it did not end well for working people. I've known a lot of people over the years who worked in the airline industry, and they got completely screwed. And you're right. It was the beginning of end of the defined benefit pension that rippled across every other industry and has, given rise to these crummy 401ks that, well, there's really nothing in there. So to me, I was so thrilled to see that you guys were able to push this forward. But it seems like this isn't a partisan issue. A couple not too long ago, we had Joe Walsh, the former Libertarian Republican congressman from Illinois, on the program, who said he was ready to jump on board with a 90% pay movement. And now we see Washington Post reporter Heather Long, I guess, reporting that Josh Hawley, the Republican from Missouri, is talking about an 80% pay plan. How is that different? Explain the differences between what they're pushing for and what you're talking about.
Well, it's the same concept, really. It's about keeping people in their jobs and connected to their paychecks. And this is what Josh Hawley is proposing, is what Denmark is doing right now. And that's keeping people in their jobs, getting their paychecks through their companies, keeping everything in place, essentially freezing the economy till we get the virus under control, so that you don't have a big disruption on the other side. You can just start back up again. And 80% is not 100%. And let's face it, 100% of a 40-hour work week or equivalent in our flight hours is not what people are earning to get by. Many people are working 2 and 3 jobs or counting on overtime hours to get by. So this is still a major cut. So I want to be really clear about that. But people are at home. The expenses are not as great. They're not using gas to go back and forth to work. So in an ideal scenario where everything is sort of at a stop, hopefully people can get by and pay their bills on that. And then you have people already sitting in their jobs and in our country still connected to their health care and able to start again as soon as that virus has moved by. And so that's the idea behind it. And actually, I'm trying to get in touch with Josh Hawley right now, because we have already done this in the CARES Act. And if this is what he wants to do, he needs to hook up with us right now and make sure that Secretary Mnuchin doesn't screw this up, because this is exactly what he's trying to do right now, and we've already done it.
Now, this is the scary part of this, and I was not a Mnuchin fan at any point in time. Anyone attached to Goldman Sachs, no thanks. And in this moment, he's the last guy I want in charge of this, which is why I've been calling for someone like Elizabeth Warren to head up a Truman-esque commission to really oversee what he's doing and to watch where every dime is going.
So I will tell you, good news then, that the Congressional Oversight Commission Schumer has appointed Elizabeth Warren's key policy person to serve on that commission, to oversee what Mnuchin is doing. And I released an op-ed with Katie Porter yesterday, and I'm supporting Katie Porter as the other appointee to that commission. And that commission can actually do that work and oversee, just like Elizabeth Warren did, oversee what Mnuchin is doing and call him out when he is doing it wrong, and making that very clear to the American public. So one thing I do want to, I just talked about a whole bunch of doom and gloom, Rick, but I want to give people hope, because the fact of the matter is we got something done that is historic in this CARES Act. Just getting those payroll grants into this bill and signed off on in a bipartisan agreement is historic. Never been done before in this country, where we have built a bailout package that is aimed at the workers themselves. The corporations can't do anything else with it. And not only do they have to spend it entirely on payroll and keep everyone in their jobs, they also cannot give stock buybacks for a year after the grants are finished. They cannot, there's a limit on their executive compensation. They cannot have any dividends during that time. So we put restrictions on them in 2 different ways. One, where they have to spend the money, and it's directed right at the workers, and they don't get to enrich themselves with stock buybacks, executive bonuses, and dividends.
And I love the fact that you were able to help push that through. And I credit that to people like you, the labor movement, pushing for that, and Bernie Sanders and that movement of workers who were pushing for progressive change. I got to be honest, I'm right there with you. This was historic. But here's the other part of this for me. We've done some good stuff. But out of this crisis should come something that's going to buoy us even further. If this is going to be, a huge change, maybe out of it we get some opportunity to actually help the working class. I don't know, maybe get out of debt a little bit, maybe move a little bit forward a little bit. We're doing it with corporations. And the thing is, you see Boeing, for instance, and I wanted to ask you about this specifically. Boeing has said that, they don't want the money if there's strings attached. They don't want an equity partner, is I think what their CEO said. And my point has always been throughout all of these bailouts is, if we're giving you the money, shouldn't we get stake in it? Isn't that what investors do? As an investor in this country, and ultimately the money that we're giving these companies, shouldn't we benefit from that at least a little bit?
Yeah, so there's 2 different provisions in the aviation part of the stimulus bill, and I should be really clear, Boeing is not a part of our aviation bill. So they are separate, but they should have strings attached. The airlines and the airport operators have already agreed to those strings. And those strings are the ones that I just described. Right. It has to go to the workers, and they can't have these other things. Now, they can also get loans. And in those loans, there is an equity stake. There is a return to the American taxpayer. The return to the American taxpayer on the payroll grants is that you don't have people in the unemployment line and you have people still paying taxes and still contributing to the economy. That's the return to the taxpayer over there. But for the money that the airlines will get in loans to cover their operating costs, yes, there should be a return to the American people, and there should be strings attached to that, and there should be equity attached to that. And the fact that Boeing won't agree to that is absurd, especially with the kind of year that Boeing has had. So if they won't make any promises to keep their workers on the job, and they won't make any promises that they're not going to enrich themselves in this process, and they won't make any promises that they're going to have any sort of accountability to the American people, then they don't deserve any federal funding.
I'm right there with you. And their CEO said they had other options. I've said, good, then use the other options. We can help other companies that are going to help workers get ahead in this. Last line of questioning I've got for you, because, this, as I said, is an opportunity. And I'm hoping that people are paying attention and holding these folks accountable. What would you like to see come out of the next portion of this? I mean, the CARES Act was a huge step forward. They're talking about, CARES 2 and subsequently down the line. What are you hoping? What are you guys fighting for? What are you hoping comes next?
So the other thing that I just want to say, Rick, is that when we put together this plan for these payroll grants, we said this should be applied to aviation, but this is something that should be a template for everyone else. So first and foremost, that should be a template, and this is what I want to let people know. So many times we fight for things that we don't have in hand yet. And right now the CARES Act has also $500 billion that can be allocated out at the Treasury Secretary's discretion, but with the oversight of the Congressional Oversight Commission. So we can actually direct the Treasury Secretary to do the same thing for other industries too and call people back to work. That already exists. Those funds are already allocated. We just need to have the terms of those funds sent to corporations who follow the same guidelines. No layoffs, continue the paychecks, and the restrictions that I talked about. On top of that, we need to have pandemic premium pay. All those essential workers who are on the front lines risking their lives should be getting extra pay for that. We need to have emergency whistleblower protections, because some of the reasons that we have learned that some of the things are not in place that need to be to keep us all safe have been because workers have spoken up. We need to have a robust whistleblowing protections that are in the national interest and allow workers to speak up, and more funding to OSHA in order to enforce those whistleblower protections so that we can understand what's wrong and address it. We need to have student loan debt forgiveness, $10,000 for every worker, and a complete forgiveness for any essential worker working during this crisis. We need to have COBRA premium subsidies and accompanying tax credits so that we're covering COBRA during this time, and anyone who does actually lose their job doesn't lose their health care. That is continued to be covered. We need to have health coverage for every American during this time. So there needs to be the ability for any American to go and get any unemployed person who doesn't have health insurance right now to go and get health care coverage without any cost. We need to waive the family and medical leave hours worked eligibility requirements, because people are not going to be able to work right now. This is something people are not thinking about. The fact that we have people sitting at home means that they're not building that eligibility for family and medical leave going forward. So those family and medical leave eligibility requirements need to be frozen by the DOL during this national emergency so that people have those benefits available and on for a year after the national emergency ends. We need to require the end of leisure travel and only have essential travel to our communities. That's specific to aviation. We need to make sure that retirement security is guaranteed, that no one loses their pension as a result of the coronavirus. There needs to be federal funding to prop up the PBGC, so there is not a requirement for a distress termination on those plans. We need to have economic recovery so that we have the small business program so that people can stay connected to their jobs and their health care. And we need to protect our democracy and the 500,000 postal workers by funding a national vote-by-mail program. So that is going to protect jobs, and it's also going to protect our democracy. We need to shore up the long-term postal service, long-term viability plan by getting rid of the retiree healthcare and pension pre-funding obligations that are there to bankrupt the United States Postal Service that we all count on. And by the way, that is a real necessity in our country for equality, because it doesn't matter where you live, what you look like, what community you come from. If you want to send a package somewhere, you pay the same price as someone who is in a different economic status than you or in a different community than you. And we need to continue to have that service to all of our small communities and all of our rural areas as well. That's how people oftentimes get their prescription drugs. That's how they get connected to the rest of the world. That's how, during this process, I want to give a shout out to all those postal workers out there and letter carriers. They have been on the job since day one of this pandemic, and they are continuing to do that work for us every single day, and nobody's talking about it. We got to make sure that we protect them because they protect us. We need to have federal funding to the states as a cudgel for strengthening states' responses to the coronavirus. And we need to make sure that that is ensuring that we have PPE for everyone who is out there responding to this. And that needs to include stay-at-home orders for everyone, and there needs to be a clear, coordinated federal response here.
That is an incredibly long laundry list of things to keep people active and busy and calling their representatives daily. We've got a lot of time. Pick up the phone and any one of those things throw in there. And if I could just throw my little pet peeve in as well, and the unemployment tax. It's been bugging me since Reagan did it back in the 80s. You shouldn't have to pay tax on the unemployment benefit if you lost your job through no part of your own. Just that simple. But Sarah, I appreciate the time, the passion, the fight. Please keep it up, and I look forward to talking to you again really soon.
Okay, and Rick, this is our opportunity to fight this inequality right now, and we should get busy with it. And Flying with Sarah, I've got an article up there from Hamilton Nolan from today that everyone should read. A pandemic is a moment for the great equalizer of inequality, and we need to understand how this has to be our opportunity. We can't just let the vulture capitalists understand what they can get out of this time. So we need to stand together and take care of each other. Thanks so much, Rick.
Absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. Appreciate it. Sarah Nelson, the president of the Flight Attendants Union, the Association of Flight Attendants, CWA. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Email me, rick@thericksmithshow.com. Quick break. Right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people on the talk.
The Rick Smith Show, where working people come to talk.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1970. That was the day that Minneapolis Teachers Union Local 59 went out on strike. They took the vote to strike despite the fact that state law prohibited teachers from striking. But after months of negotiations that went nowhere, the teachers decided it was time to act. The main issue for the strike was wages. One teacher, George Kimball, recalled why he had supported the strike, stating, "The wages were so low. I had 5 children at the time, and we could barely survive. We couldn't take it anymore." The strike lasted 14 days. The teachers did not win the gains they hoped for with their work action, but their strike drew public attention to the lack of bargaining rights for public sector workers. The next year, Minnesota Governor Wendell Anderson signed into law the Public Employees Labor Relations Act. This act granted public sector workers the right to collective bargaining. The Minneapolis teachers' strike played a key role in Minnesota's public sector workers gaining the fundamental right of union representation. The 1960s and 70s saw a wave of teacher strikes across the nation as educators stood up for themselves as workers. Across the country, there were more than 1,000 teacher strikes between 1960 and 1974. More than 750,000 teachers walked out of the classroom and onto the picket lines. By the end of the 1970s, more than 70% of public school teachers were covered by collective bargaining agreements. For teachers concerned about class size, pensions, wages, school safety, and the quality of education, the strike remains an important way to build solidarity and to show the power of our nation's educators.
Radio of, for, and by we the working people. The Rick Smith Show.
So to wrap up our Sarah Day here, and look, I find all of our Sarahs equally fascinating, but I'll tell you, Sarah Nelson's just got my blood pumping and angry to get to calling Congress and getting them to really stand up and step forward for workers. It's just that simple. But I do want to finish on something of a kind of a funny story. Not funny, just kind of for our time. Evidently, a California guy was arrested because he punched his mother in the face. Not funny. The reason that he punched her in the face was because she hid the toilet paper. Evidently, he wanted the toilet paper. She claims he uses too much, and it's a important commodity, and she just wanted it to last a little bit. He was very angry about it, and as my wife said, it's a pretty blank thing to do. So there you go. Is this what it's come to? Is this what it's come to, that you're going to punch mom over a roll of toilet paper? Is it that bad? Sad stuff. Anyway, if you missed any of today's Sarah Day, you can download the podcast at thericksmithshow.com. You get the smartphone on your smartphone. Take the program on the go wherever you're going. As always, you can email me, Rick at thericksmithshow.com. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you back here next time.
You've been listening to The Rick Smith Show. Email Rick at rick@thericksmithshow.com.